So in the previous video, we had outlined some of the problems from the practice case study, as well as the theories and principles of learning that we've addressed in this unit. Okay, so having identified a problem, the second line says connect a problem to a theory or principle of learning. So we take one. Let's say we take ability groups. All right. So the question is, why is that a problem? We have to make an argument for it. That's what we're doing. The case study analysis is helping you develop an argument for what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, etc. So the idea of ability grouping is not helpful. It's not going to work. Why? Well, because research has shown that putting kids together in groups of same ability doesn't really help all of the students become more successful academically, socially, etc. Why? Well, what we find is for the high achievers, not that big a deal. A lot of the high achievers seem to do well. Who doesn't do well? The low achievers typically do not do well. Okay. Now you start asking, why do teachers rely on this strategy? And what you find is they'll say things like, well, it makes it easier for me to get around to address each group's individual issues. I don't have the high group being slowed down by the middle achievers, the low achievers, et cetera, et cetera. And they give you these rationales. As teachers, we're about outcomes. We set a set of objectives, we have an outcome. And if the outcome is working for some of the kids, but it's not working for another group of kids, that seems to me that is probably not a very good solution or a strategy. Why doesn't it work for the younger kids? Well, a lot of times what we find is that they're not learning very effectively from one another because they're in a stable group. All right. You also find that those kids are often left behind academically because the teachers aren't developing the tools to meet their needs. It's more difficult. Kids that struggle, it's hard to teach those. It's easy to teach kids that get it. That makes our job fun. Oh, I love teaching kids that are really smart because our job's a lot easier. But when you're working with younger kids, or it doesn't matter what age really, but you're working with kids that are struggling, that's where you earn your money. That's the hard work. And unfortunately, putting kids in the low achieving group, the teachers can only dedicate a certain amount of time, allocate a certain amount of time to each group. Those kids that are in the low end tend to don't get as much instruction. So what else are the problems? Well, what we find is that we see that some of these kids start seeing themselves as better than other kids. Okay, that creates some animosity. That's not helpful. We're trying to create a positive environment. And when we put kids together, high achievers, low achievers, and suddenly we see those differences sometimes can create some animosity. And when that animosity takes place, then we're creating a very not a very productive classroom. So you ask, why is ability grouping a problem or labeling? Okay, well, think about it. If you're placed in the low achieving group, and she even identified, she said some of these kids knew where they, in the case study, they knew where they fit. They knew that they were the low end. What do? They start to give up. They don't put as much effort into it. Well, why do kids not put a lot of effort into things? What's one of those reasons? Let's go to social cognitive theory. Let's go to self-efficacy. Kids that don't believe that they can accomplish a task, they're not going to do well. What are they likely to do? They're likely to choose a different activity. Quit easily, okay? They're not going to persist. They're not going to put a lot of effort into it. And so the idea is, well, how do I help them? Well, labeling them as crows or daisies or low achievers, that's not going to be beneficial. So you've told me that ability grouping is not an effective strategy because kids start to see these labels and start to identify with them and create perhaps a low self-efficacy. You could even go as much as to say maybe they're self-fulfilling prophecy, that they only see themselves as being a low achiever for a long period of time, right? And so the idea is that those two things is a good explanation for why ability grouping is not effective. Then the third part of the case study worksheet, it says, after having discussed this or why, or show how that these things are connected, now you need to come up with a solution based on your theory or principle of learning. I don't want you to say ability groups is linked to self-efficacy, explain why it's linked to self-efficacy, and then when I ask you for a solution, you say, well, according to Piaget, I need to create disequilibrium. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Or you're to say, oh, from an information processing perspective, I'm like, no. You said it was linked to self-efficacy. Solve the problem with your argument, self-efficacy. How do you change a student's self-efficacy? What's your solution? Now you might say something like, well, I'm going to get rid of the groups, the ability groups, and I'm going to create mixed ability groups where the low achievers are mixed with moderate or middle and high achievers. This way, they'll each get an opportunity to learn from one another, different perspectives, and as a result of those different perspectives, they will develop a greater sense of self-efficacy. Or the fact that they're working with high achievers, their group success might be more likely, and with more success builds higher self-efficacy. That's a rational argument. That makes sense to me. Okay? Say, for instance, that you have your issue is parental involvement. Okay? Wow, that's a tough one. I think, what can you do there? That might be one that I say to myself is, man, I really need to get these teachers more involved. I'm sorry, the parents more involved, but I'm not exactly sure how to go about that. Do you see what I mean? Laying out all the problems, you might pick some and you say parent involvement, and they're like, I really think I need to get Mrs. Blaine, but how do I do it? Well, there are strategies to do that, but the success and the difficulty might be so arduous that you might find yourself, man, there are other things that I'd rather work on than that one. Not that it's not important, but that it might be so difficult and so time consuming that you could be more useful in other ways. All right. So maybe we take a look at something like the kids fighting. Okay. Why are the kids fighting? And so you look over here and you say something like this. You see that, well, any number of things. You might see modeling might be a situation right there. Okay. You might talk about, again, you might talk about the issue of self-efficacy. Okay. You might even start talking about it from a Piagetian standpoint. Okay. The schemes, they have schemes in place, and you could say that these kids are fighting because they see the kids that are overachievers that are doing really well. Okay. And since they're doing really well, their idea of them being better students, and you suddenly start to see yourself as not an effective student because you have a scheme for kids that are failing as being dummies themselves. And when the students, the high achieving kids, are calling them that stuff, that really has an effect on them. And so the idea is you're going to take a look at these issues right here, or you might pick one, and you say, how do I describe or connect that problem? And once I make that connection, I got to come up with a solution based on one of these issues right here. All right. So we look at other things as far as potential problems and what we could do about that. Okay, we talk about teachers' gossips. Okay, teachers gossiping, is that a big problem? I think it is. Okay, Eric, defend your argument. Defend why you think it's a problem. I look over here and I think, okay, I'm a new teacher and I come to a new school and I hear the teachers in the resource room talking about these kids and telling me how they're bad kids, the brothers are bad kids, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm new. I might agree that I already have a low teacher self-efficacy. I'm not very confident in my abilities. And who am I looking to? Who do you look to when you get to a new school? You look to a mentor. You look for somebody that's going to serve as a model to help you. Okay, that's reasonable. So I'm going to look to these veteran teachers. Modeling. Oh, social cognitive theory. What do I know about that? I know that we tend to pick teachers, or we tend to pick models that are competent, that are authority figures, okay, that have plenty of experience, that are doing things that are relevant to my own experience or what I'm doing. These teachers fit the bill for serving as a mentor or a model. And now what has happened? Because they're gossiping and Celeste hears this stuff, if she feels like she feels compelled to do what they do, suddenly what you have is kids being talked about, other teachers perhaps being talked about, and that's not going to serve them well. Here's how it gets even worse. They're talking about these kids, and what happens? She starts to create an image of what these kids are. She starts to prejudge them. So as a result of listening to and engaging in gossip about kids, she gets to a classroom, and as a result of that, she's already formed she already has a preconceived notion of what the student is like. And if she thinks he's bad, if she thinks he's no good, not going to work very hard, not going to be very productive, not going to be very smart, what do you realize? You start seeing what you think. Okay, you start believing or you see what you believe. They have those preconceived notions. What does that sound like? Let me look over the board here. Oh, I know. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Pretty soon, I see what I thought I was going to see. That Eddie Blaine is really not a very productive member of our classroom. And when I go into the classroom and I see that, I'm setting him up for failure. That's not a good thing. So now I say that teachers gossiping creates as a model can affect me and influence me by creating self-fulfilling prophecy, which then is going to adversely affect a student. So what do I do? What's the solution? Well, the solution is, okay, I've got to find a better model. I've got to look for mentors that represent or demonstrate the types of things that we look for an effective professional teacher. That's what I got to do. All right. Secondly, is I could actually talk about how important it is that I stay away from and try to better understand who the student is without any sort of prejudging. But the idea is we recognize how easy it is for a new teacher to fall in line with the other teachers because they think they've been here for 14 years, they know better than I do, right? So the idea behind, and the last part is, the last part of the worksheet is, what are some other ideas that you may have to fix the problems that you see? Now, the case study that we read was a kind of a brief case study. The case study you'll read, Making Connections, will offer you probably a lot more different stuff along these lines, okay? So, again, the idea is to establish first a set of problems. You already know the different theories and principles of learning, and now you've got to make the connections, tell me how they're connected, and then come up with a solution using that theory or principle of learning. Okay? The idea is case studies are hopefully an example that's something we might see in our own classroom that is authentic, that it matches with what we might see. Okay? If you have any questions related to the case study, don't hesitate to reach out to me. But hopefully this video will serve as a good reference for you when you're doing your own case study. All right. Take care.